The 1978 Corvette did not have a lot of horsepower, but it had something more important: sales. Hi there, Rick Jabrul with another chapter in the automotive evolution, here once again at the Martin Auto Museum in Phoenix. You know, this is a really great collection. More than 180 cars that go back to the very roots of the automobile. And right now, I'm in the Corvette room. We have 14 Vettes ranging from C1s to the modern mid-engine C8. And today we're going to talk about this 1978 C3 because it tells an important story about what was happening in the automotive world during that era. But first, make sure you like and subscribe, and in the comments down below, let me know what I got right, what I got wrong. There's always something I get wrong. And make sure you tell me your C3 Corvette stories. Did you have a high horsepower early model or a tail ender with looks but not much more? Did your family have one? All right, let's talk about this Corvette right here, the 1978 model, because that was the year that Chevrolet was marking the 25th anniversary of Corvette production. You know, the Corvette had come a long way from that first model in 1953. It was now firmly established as America's sports car. The entire 1978 Corvette lineup included 25th anniversary badging to mark the milestone. Chevy also offered a silver anniversary edition appearance package with two-tone paint, aluminum wheels, and additional trim options. By 78, the third generation, or C3 Corvette, had been around for 10 years. When it first came out in 1968, it was a big styling shift from the mid-year Stingrays with much more flowing lines. But underneath, it really wasn't that much different. The same basic frame was used, although it has some additional elements and different mounting points for the body. Throughout the 1970s, the C3 evolved in both style and performance. In 1973, the nose grew longer to accommodate the 5-mile-an-hour bumpers. Then, in 1974, the chrome rear bumpers also disappeared, replaced by a rather large butt that housed bumpers designed to meet new federal standards. The 1978 big styling change, though, was a new fastback rear window, which really changed the outline of the car. But while the styling was evolving, performance, well, it wasn't that great. In 1969, the Corvette had two engines that made 430 horsepower, more than that. But by 1978, the best you could do was 220 horses. But that actually wasn't too bad for that year. The 280Z made 170 horses, while the base 911 was delivering 180 horsepower, and it cost a lot more. Let's walk around and take a look at the styling of our 1978 Corvette, and I'm going to start right up front with the 25th anniversary badge. And I always laugh when I look at this because underneath those two cross flags is this area that to me kind of looks like the Death Star out of Star Wars. Remember, the movie had come out just a couple years before this, and I sometimes wonder if that's what they were thinking when they came up with this design. Of course, you see the longer front bumpers, urethane, no chrome, that had gone away several years earlier. You know, the 1968 car is what we call the Mako Shark styling. Now, technically, it evolved from a concept car called the XP755, but everybody calls that the Mako Shark car, so we call this the Mako Shark styling. But it had evolved over time, and the front wheel wells are perfect examples. It's really squared off, kind of flared out a little bit. When you look behind the rear wheel, you can see how it flares out right there. If you go up onto the cowl in 1968, it was flatter, it had some vents right here, air inlets. Now those are gone, and you've got the windshield wipers tucked in down below. I think about 15,000 people opted for the silver anniversary paint job with the black up above, the silver down below. There was also a pace car edition. You could get these glass tops. I don't think a lot of people ordered these. These cost about $350 extra if you were going to order them. Of course, the most significant styling change that happened in 1978 was this big piece of glass right here. The previous year, it was a flat window with what are sometimes called the sugar scoops that went off to the side, sailplanes that came down. This obviously more aerodynamic, kind of a sleeker look. Do not call this a hatchback though. This does not pop up. That won't happen for another couple of years. In the back, of course, we've got the big butt that came a few years before this, housing those 5-mile-an-hour federal safety bumpers. And really, there's probably two groups of people. There's people who hate this bumper, and there's people who like it. And to be honest with you, I'm one of those. It doesn't bother me. Now, this car is about 3 inches longer than some of the previous years because of all those elements that have been added over time, the front bumpers and the rear bumpers. But once again, to be honest with you, I think it's just fine. Now, once again, the car had a lot of looks, didn't have a lot of horsepower, but you could get some extra handling added to it. They had a Gymkhana package. It was only $41, and if you bought that, you got higher rate front and rear springs, heavy-duty shock absorbers, a better stabilizer bar, and there were about 12,000 people that ordered those. So, they decided they wanted just a little more handling to go with, well, the performance that they had in the 220 horsepower engine, which we'll talk about in just a moment. So once again, this is the styling of our C3 Corvette, the Mako Shark, and this, of course, the 25th anniversary edition. All right, stepping into our 1978 Corvette is both similar and a little bit different than previous C3s. Now, I will say, at this point, they have got down the seating position. It is really comfortable to get into this car. You go to the C1s, to be honest with you, it's really not very comfortable. I don't like the seating position, the big wheel. This is a driver's car. Moving forward, I think they really had that nailed down. The biggest change from a styling perspective in 1978 in the interior had to do with the tachometer and the speedometer. In the previous year, 1977, it was in round surrounds, a round bezel around it. For 1978, they went to this square, rectangular kind of look. Still the round instruments themselves, just a bigger, bolder look. The center console, this design had come out in 1977, so it essentially carried over to 1978 with very minor changes. You see, we've got the 25th anniversary limited edition badging. The radio, well, you had several options. If you just wanted the base AM FM, that was going to cost you right around $200. But you got to remember, this is 1978. If you wanted to bump up, you could get an AM FM CB radio. That was going to cost you more than $600. Got to remember, this was after Smokey and the Bandit Convoy, right? Some people wanted that CB radio. Of course, if all you were interested in was music, well, then the obvious option was the 8-track tape player. Remember those? That would cost you just over $400 to put those in. But there were 1,700 people who said, I don't even want to listen to music. I don't need any radio in there at all. And so they had nothing right there, just a little plate covering that up. In the back, as I mentioned, is a bigger piece of glass in the back, but it is not a hatchback, right? It doesn't pop up. So if you want to get something into that larger area, well, you were going to have to bring it in through the driver's compartment. So it really wasn't as convenient as it would be just a few years later when they came out with the lifting glass. But that was also a great area for the 2 optional speakers that you could get back there. I think they only cost like $50. Kind of give more, of a surrounding sound kind of impression. You also got a bigger gas tank in 1978. Meant you could actually go farther. The previous year, I think it was only 17 gallons. For 1978, they bumped it up to 24 gallons. And overall, it was a nice, comfortable car. A few minor changes here and there. Once again, the armrests now are screwed in versus being molded in. But you got T-tops just above us if you want to have those. But I would say this is a very comfortable driving car. By the way, I'm looking on the odometer for this particular car here in the museum. And if this is the original rating on it, it only has 15 miles. Now, an awful lot of people back in 1978 were buying these cars and putting them away because they thought they were collector cars and they were going to make a lot of money on them before they were all said and done. So once again, it didn't have great performance, but as my old friend Brock Yates wrote way back then, he talked about the fact that this car, braked better, drove smoother, and outperformed a lot of Corvettes since the days of the big, LT1s and ZL1s, the L88s. Okay, we're nowhere near L88, but Brock Yates was a pretty picky car guy, and if he liked this car, I think it was because he felt that performance was finally starting to come back into the Corvette world. Under the hood of our 1978 Corvette that we have here at the museum is the only performance engine that they offered that year, a 350 cubic inch motor with 220 horses. In fact, there were only 2 engines available in 78. The first, the base L48, made 185 horses, used the same basic 350 block and a Rochester 4-barrel carb, but nearly 13,000 people opted to pay an extra $525 for more speed. The L82 engine had a higher compression ratio, aluminum intake manifold, revised camshaft timing, improved exhaust flow. And the result, well, it was more horsepower at higher speeds while still meeting emission standards, 220 horses. By the way, while those numbers were low, it was still better than just a few years earlier. In 1975, the base L48 engine only made 165 horses, and the performance L82 was 205. The 350 cubic inch small block V8 used in the 78 Corvette really has a long history with Chevrolet. The 350 displacement was introduced in 1969. In 70, they had big power, 370 horses, but then it began to slide. A combination of using net horsepower instead of gross and, of course, having to meet emission compliance. In 1979, though, things would improve. The base engine would bump up to 195, and the performance L82 would make 225. Of course, these days, the base Corvette, the C8, makes about 500 horsepower or so. So we've come a long way from those dark days when fuel mileage and emission standards were really throttling performance back in the late 70s. By the way, Chevrolet advertised a Corvette for just $11.50. All right, it was just a poster, but it was the same picture that was used on billboards all over the country. Something Chevy said you could proudly display in your family room, your office, your dorm, or wherever you got wall space. But here's the stat that really matters when we talk about this 1978 Corvette. That's the fact that they sold 47,000 of these in 1978. That was a pretty strong number. But it got even better the following year, 1979, when they sold 54,000 Corvettes. Now, once again, performance wasn't as great as it had been a few years earlier, but it was on par with just about everything else that was available. And more importantly, it looked better than so many cars. People were buying the style. Got to remember, it was the disco era, right? That late 70s. They didn't have great performance, but they had wonderful style. And of course, well, this had a long run as a C3. Started in 1968, ran all the way up till 1982. By then, it was pretty long in the tooth. When the C4 comes out in 1984, because they skipped 1983, well, it's better in just about every way. Styling, performance, a lot of the technology that's inside of the car. But you really have to give it to this 1978 Silver Anniversary Edition Corvette, because performance was starting to return. We were just getting a glimpse of the fact that things were going to get better. And this car, with its increase in performance over what was coming just a few years earlier, really gave us a taste, just a hint about what we were going to get with the killer Corvettes that are available today.